Welcome, Christoph Mitchell. Can you describe the situation, broadband situation in the States? Good or bad?
Well, I think it depends on where you are. It's very good in a few places and really bad in a few other places, and in between in most of the places. And so you have some communities that have moved ahead with a very impressive fiber network offering very fast speeds at what are reasonable rates for the American market, although they're substantially above what is common here in Stockholm. But there's other areas where people have very limited access to internet, where they may only have dial-up, where they may have to use satellite, or substantial areas and substantial rural populations have very low quality DSL. And in many of those cases, there's no real prospect for how long it will take for them to have a better service. So it's across the map, in the sense that it's very good and globally competitive in some areas like Chattanooga, Tennessee, Kansas City, but it's in other areas that might only be 100 miles away. It's very poor. And unfortunately, I think the gap between the good and the bad is getting bigger rather than smaller.
And what is driving the rollout of broadband in different settings?
In many cases where it's driven by local governments, it's driven by a need for improving the economy. Excuse me. It's a sense of how businesses can be competitive. So there may be existing businesses that are not able to get the connections that they need, and so a local government will first try to work with existing providers to improve service, and if that doesn't work, then they may build a new fiber network in order to make sure those businesses are connected. And in some areas, they've built fiber networks to attract new employers to the region. Now in other areas, there's some small companies that may be connecting areas, a few areas of town or a few business corridors. And that's also good for those areas, but the danger is over time it's harder to have universal service if you have the areas that have the most desirable to serve, if those are taken by providers that are not willing to expand it to other areas which may be less profitable. So to some extent, it's a little worrisome when we have this expansion here and expansion there, and there's no cohesive plan. But where local governments are getting involved, it's mostly to expand benefits to local companies, and it tends to be a little bit more cohesive, where there's a plan to connect everyone.
You have a lot of really big operators provide broadband in some way.
Right.
Aren't doing well enough, or didn't have any interest to build more, or? Well,
in some ways they're doing too well, you might say. If you're a stockholder in Comcast or Time Warner Cable, you're doing very well. And one of the reasons they're doing very well is because their customers have no other choice. And so they don't have to invest in their networks in order to have greater revenues. They can just raise their prices. So the problem ultimately is not one of it not being profitable. It's that those who are operating the networks may not have the incentive to upgrade to new networks. And the way the regulatory environment works in the United States, there's no way to compel them. And it's impractical to have structural separation, as Benoit was arguing on the panel, which I think is smart, where you have those who own the network don't offer any services, and those who offer services don't have physical networks. That's not really practical in the United States, where the big companies make a lot of donations to both parties that run the government. And so neither party in government really wants to upset those companies by forcing them to divest of assets. So this is where local governments come in, and they say, well, we have a great need and we have the capacity to build it, so we're going to. And in some places that's caused conflict, where the providers have passed laws to try and stop them from doing it.
But are the end customer satisfied with this lack of competition?
No, they're certainly not. When you look at polls of what are the least popular businesses in the United States, the big cable and telephone companies are right up there. To give you an illustration, if you remember the BP oil spill, British Petroleum, they were dumping in the news every night in the United States. Everyone was looking at photos and video of oil going into the Gulf of Mexico for 2 months. That's all anyone talked about. That year, Comcast tied BP for the most hated corporation in America. That's that's a high level of dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Google Fibre, you can't talk about the states about coming into Google Fibre. What have Google Fibre initiative makes you change? Talking about the broadband, the debate, the prices, and the market and so on.
Sorry. Google Fibre fundamentally changed everything because we had super fast networks in many municipalities, but the press wasn't paying any attention to them. And the press was more interested in if Comcast or another cable company would do a slight increase in speed. It was when Google came in and said, we're going to do this vastly higher capacity network and we're going to make it affordable, that the cable and telephone companies were confronted with the inadequacy of their service. And when local leaders started to understand the importance of greater service, and increasingly at the higher levels as well, at the national government. So it really changed a lot of things. One thing that it changed that I didn't have a chance to get into in my presentation is that Google has announced that everyone that's in the area being served could pay a one-time fee of $300, which is can be amortized over a year at about $25 a month, which is less than the cost most of us pay for broadband. And if they pay that for 7 or 8 years, I forget which, they will get free access that's equivalent to a DSL connection, which is 5 megabits down, 1 megabit up about. That is revolutionary, and it's an idea that we're seeing others start to copy, and it's a terrific way of making sure that everyone has access to the internet, regardless of income level. And so that's something that we've long been trying to figure out how to do to make sure everyone has access. And it was Google that came along with the idea, and I expect to see many local governments copying that over time. So that's another way in which they've changed the discussion. But most importantly, in the United States, to make a difference at the federal level, it really helps to have a corporation that has a lot of jobs, that is making contributions to make sure that elected officials take it seriously. And that's another way that Google has changed the debate.
Is Google an open access model with...
No. No, it is not. Google provides services only on the Google network. Google's the only one acting as an ISP. So with Google, you have a choice between a gigabit connection for $70 a month, or for $120 a month, you get a gigabit connection, and you also get a number of television channels as well. So Google says we're open in the sense that we're never going to restrict you from going to any internet content that you'd like, and you can use Netflix and you can use a lot of those things, but they don't allow other companies to provide services over the fiber that they've built. And they view it as being not economical if they were to provide open access because of the way the US market is structured.
Yeah. When you look at the States, you have a lot of really interesting ICT areas, so Silicon Valley, New York. It seems that you have a lot of companies and people who's doing great innovation and applications and so on. And you still have some, well, problem, I would say, with broadband. I'm saying, why it's going so good for you?
You know, that's a really good question. And I don't think we have the full answer. To some extent, I think it helps that a lot of the people around the entire world that have an idea have come to the United States to make it happen. And so it's, there's a variety of aspects, but that's one, and that so many people want to come to the United States to enact their ideas and their dreams. I think another is that our schooling system, I think, provides more opportunities for independent thought and entrepreneurialism. We allow companies to try and fail and without too much punishment as they may have in other countries. And so it's a good environment for starting companies. But it's indeed, San Francisco, the Silicon Valley are not the best places to get internet access. And so we find that there's actually people moving to those areas. So in Kansas City, a lot of entrepreneurs have moved there now, even though Kansas City was not previously thought of as a high-tech hub. I personally have spoken with people in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is a beautiful area of the country and has been well known by outdoor enthusiasts, people who like to live an outdoor lifestyle, bicycling and rock climbing and things like that. But I've met people that moved there to create, the next YouTube or the next big application, rather than moving to Silicon Valley, because Chattanooga has built this incredible network. So it's to some extent, I think we may see some changes in terms of where the most innovative products are coming out of the United States. But we have a fear that we won't be the innovative country forever, and it's something that a number of us are trying to improve, because we want people to bring their innovations to us and create them in the United States.
You have been here in Stockholm, Sweden, some days. When you come home to the States, what are you going to tell?
Well, one of the things I'm going to say is that you have to have a long-term vision. And I think that coming here on the 20th anniversary of Stokab is impressive, because it's not something that you built overnight. The results are incredible over this long time frame. I think one of the things that I'm taking home from being here, though, is seeing how different Stockholm is from American cities in terms of so many apartment buildings. And there's a different relationship, I think, with real estate firms that have a lot of interest in apartment buildings, who are willing to then invest in fiber connections. Whereas in the United States, the operator often has to invest in the connections to many single household homes, which is more expensive. So I think it's important not to come home and say we can all do what Stockholm has done. But what we take away from Stockholm and Stokab is that we need to have a long-term perspective and smart planning, and taking advantage of the things that cities do well in terms of making sure there's fiber everywhere and that sort of thing.
Thank you for taking your time.
Thank you.